The Case of the Red Rose. It was a dark, rainy afternoon in London when Detective Arthur Langford received an urgent telegram in his office, a sophisticated room lined with books and maps of London. The message was brief. A murder has occurred at Redwood Manor. Your presence is urgently required. Langford, a man with a sharp intellect and peculiar habits, immediately prepared himself. He donned his tweed coat and adjusted his felt hat. With a determined look, he grabbed his badge and set off for Redwood Manor. Upon arrival, Langford was met by the butler, Mr. Jenkins, an elderly man with a worried expression. "Detective Langford, it's a relief to see you. The body is in the library. Please follow me." Langford followed Jenkins through long corridors adorned with tapestries and artwork until they reached the library, an elegant room filled with rare books and a large fireplace. In the library, the body of Edward Grey, a prominent industrialist, lay sprawled on the floor. Beside him rested a single red rose, pristine and perplexing. Edward's face was frozen in a look of terror. Langford approached, carefully examining the scene. "What do we have here, Mr. Jenkins?" Langford asked as he inspected the body. "There are no clear signs of violence, Detective. Only the rose beside him. No one was seen entering or leaving the manor after Mr. Grey was discovered." Langford bent down to examine the rose. "Curious. The rose doesn't seem to be a gift but a message. Was there anything else found with the body?" "No, just the rose and the body. The window was open, which might have scattered some papers," Jenkins explained. Langford proceeded to Edward's office, a room filled with documents and letters. After a thorough examination, he found correspondence indicating recent financial disputes. "Interesting," Langford murmured. "It seems there was tension in Edward's life." Langford decided to start the interrogations. The first person he spoke to was Clara Grey, the widow, who was in an adjacent room, visibly shaken. "Mrs. Grey," Langford began gently, "can you tell me what happened tonight?" Clara, her eyes red from crying, replied, "I was resting in my room. When I heard the scream, I ran to the library and found Edward already on the floor." Langford asked, "Do you have any idea who might have wanted to harm your husband?" Clara hesitated before answering. "Edward had many enemies. Recently, he was involved in financial disputes with some investors. But I never imagined it could lead to something so horrible." The next person Langford interviewed was Thomas Grey, the deceased nephew. Thomas was visibly agitated, sitting in a chair in the sitting room. "Mr. Thomas," Langford began, "where were you at the time of the murder?" "I was playing cards with some friends at a club nearby," Thomas replied. "They could confirm I was there all night." "Certainly. Here is the revised mystery story in English." Langford took note of his statement and continued, "Are you certain you didn't see anything suspicious when you came home?" "I didn't notice anything strange, apart from the storm. The streets were deserted," Thomas said, clearly nervous. Langford then asked to speak with Mr. Jenkins again. "Mr. Jenkins, did you notice anything unusual before the incident?" Jenkins thought for a moment. "Actually, Detective, I heard a noise coming from the library, but I thought it was just the storm. I was in the kitchen at the time." Langford returned to the library, reflecting on the scene. The red rose and the paper near the open window caught his attention. He carefully retrieved the paper and unrolled it. It read, "What is beautiful may hide evil." With all the evidence gathered, Langford gathered Clara, Thomas, and Jenkins in the library to present his findings. "Ladies and gentlemen," Langford began, "the murder of Edward Grey was a calculated crime. The red rose was an attempt to divert attention to something symbolic and confuse the investigation." He looked directly at Clara. "Mrs. Grey, your relationship with Edward was strained. We discovered he had recently made changes to his business that could have threatened your lifestyle. The rose was a message to you and a means to camouflage the true motive of the crime." Clara, realizing her attempt to deceive Langford had failed, broke down in tears. "Yes, I committed the crime. I was desperate to maintain the lifestyle I was accustomed to. Edward had decided to change everything, and I couldn't bear it." Thomas and Jenkins listened in shock as Clara confessed. "I tried to stage it as an accident, but I couldn't escape my own desperation." Langford, satisfied with the resolution of the case, called the police to take Clara into custody. He looked at the red rose one last time, reflecting on how beauty can often conceal malicious intentions. As the sun began to break through the clouds, Langford prepared for his next challenge, knowing that, no matter how complex the mysteries, there was always a solution waiting to be discovered.